In today's episode, we're going to be talking about psychedelics and the MAPS Society. And for those that don't know, MAPS helps with research with psychedelics in a therapeutical sense and how they can be beneficial. And my guest today is Ben. He is a clinical research associate with MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. So first off, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be really exciting.
So tell me, how did you, this is a very interesting thing to get started, and how did you get started doing research with MAPS?
Okay, so I graduated from college in 2009, and I graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology, which is not that useful a degree, really. But towards the end of my college career, I had some really, really powerful experiences with psychedelics, with MDMA in particular. And those experiences kind of gave me the sense that this was something that I wanted to really be following. It felt like there was just a lot of value in it, and I don't think at the time I could even tell you what I felt exactly was valuable about it, but I knew that it was something that I wanted to give my time and my energy to. And it took me a few years to find my way to MAPS. I worked in a couple other things. I was a personal trainer for a couple years. I worked in the private sector doing clinical trials for a year. And finally kind of made my way out here, and it's been a really good fit so far. But my interest came out of my own personal experiences, in a sense that there was something really powerful and really valuable about these substances beyond just having a crazy experience.
So let's dig in a little bit with that. What was your experience? What was so powerful that you made you change kind of your course of your life?
Um, I was I was in a very kind of type A high achiever mode. I went to an Ivy League college, and it was a very kind of meat grinder kind of environment. It was really, really intense and pretty closed down. It was kind of a cold place, and I started having these experiences with MDMA that were just, it was like, it was like I dropped down into my heart. And I could feel something that felt so much more like me, and so much more open and welcoming and accepting of others and accepting of myself. And it was something just opened up for me that I really had been totally cut off from. And I think that's what really struck me. There was just this tremendous beauty in that, and it showed me, it gave me a totally different view of the way things could be. It didn't change my behavior overnight or anything like that, but it did show me that there was a different way of being that was possible for me, and that I think is possible for lots of people. So that was kind of where that was what really struck me.
So let's talk a little bit. What is MAPS actually? What do you do there, and what is the organization as a whole trying to do?
Sure. So MAPS was founded in 1986, shortly after the DEA placed MDMA on Schedule 1, which we have a scheduling system for drugs, and Schedule 1 is reserved for drugs that are considered to have high potential for abuse and no medicinal value. And there was a really lengthy and protracted legal battle around this, and the DEA actually ended up overruling their own administrative judge to place MDMA on Schedule 1. So MAPS kind of started as almost as a reaction to that, as a way of establishing contexts and for the use of psychedelics and researching their therapeutic use. So MAPS has a few different things that we really work with now. Our primary project is developing MDMA into a prescription medicine, specifically for treating post-traumatic stress disorder. In a larger sense, we're also concerned with researching other therapeutic potentials for other psychedelics, including MDMA. We're also involved in outreach and education to sort of reduce the negative stigma that's associated with the use of psychedelics in this culture, and we're involved in harm reduction, which consists mostly of making services available at festivals that take care of people who are having difficult or challenging psychedelic experiences.
So there's a lot of different things I want to talk about. But first, let's get started with what are some of the false beliefs you feel like as a society we have about psychedelics?
Um, that's a good question, and it's interesting because I've been so like embedded in this culture for a while that it's hard to like what do people think about that? Um, I think there's just a lot of fear around it. Like everybody's sort of heard the urban legend about the guy who took too much LSD and now he thinks he's a glass of orange juice and he's scared that he'll tip over and spill or something like that, you know, or people who think that they can fly and people just sort of think they make you go crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, I think a lot you have to view a lot of that as a reaction to the counterculture of the 1960s, where it was very scary for the people in sort of more establishment roles in society to see that there were a lot of young people who were having these experiences that they could not understand, some of whom were totally dropping out of the social program period. So that was really frightening, and a lot of that kind of fear and negative stigma still persists today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I think people aren't so much afraid that they're going to get addicted, but people are afraid that they're going to have some kind of experience that they can't handle and that they won't be able to function and they'll completely lose their minds. Um, I, I, it, I think that's probably the primary thing. Also, you hear a lot today. There's a lot of noise that gets made every time somebody dies at a music festival, and you know a lot of times the blame is placed on MDMA or on other substances. So there's a lot of media attention paid to negative outcomes without considering that these are really statistical outliers and that there's not a lot of scientific rigor that's applied to those cases in terms of assessing, well, what did this person really take and what was going on in their environment and things like that.
I will say, so I told you before the show, I've never taken psychedelics. I did try MDMA once, but I don't even know if it was real because my experience was good, but it wasn't amazing.
Sure.
Um, Let me ask you, so I eventually would be interested in taking LSD, or I don't know the proper term, but just magic mushrooms, if you will. One of my fears, just like you said, is that I'm going to have such a negative experience because I know so many people that have a positive experience and they change their life, but that I'd have a negative experience and change my life in kind of a negative direction. So is that a statistic outlying experience, or what do you say to people that say stuff like that?
We have a saying around here actually that I really love, which is difficult is not the same as bad.
Hmm.
What it's important to consider is that I also like this description of psychedelics as a particularly things like LSD and mushrooms they're a non-specific amplifier of the unconscious. So they don't introduce new elements into your psyche. They bring out things that are already there.
Hmm.
Um, and that can be really scary if there is stuff buried there that's trauma or feelings that you don't want to look at or things like that. And when most people have have bad or what they would consider to be really negative experiences, it's the product of a couple things, you know, maybe not necessarily knowing what they've taken, and being kind of surprised by that, being in a setting that's not supportive of the experience that they're having, so feeling unsafe in their physical environment, or not being prepared or willing to face whatever's coming up in their experience. A surefire way to have an unpleasant experience is resisting what's happening.
Mm.
And that goes for whether you're on psychedelics or not. You know, that's a surefire way to put you into a situation that's going to be very unpleasant. So one thing when we're doing harm reduction at a festival like Burning Man or something, we're going to have a big presence at Burning Man this year. Uh, you know, we don't treat people who are coming in having a difficult experience as if there's something wrong with what they're going through, because that can kind of further that spiral of like, oh God, what's happening to me? Something horrible. I'm going crazy. I'm going to die, or whatever. You know what I mean? There's just this sort of, we try to normalize their experience and provide a safe container for it just to do itself.
Mm.
You know, like so much of the time, these experiences are something in the person's psyche or their emotional body that needs to come out and needs to be expressed and seen and treated with respect and treated with love, and they can resolve that way, you know? So that's it's easy to get spooked if you don't really understand the dynamics of what's happening in a psychedelic experience.
Absolutely. And one question I have for you, and obviously I know you can't recommend people take psychedelics or anything like that, but if there's an individual who is set on taking something and he doesn't necessarily have a lot of people around him that are pro it, is it always a bad idea to take something like that by yourself? Or is there ways to reduce the positive negative side effects?
Hmm. Um, you know, my personal feeling um, is that it's good to have a sitter.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to have somebody there who you can check in with and um, who can kind of keep tabs on your uh, physical safety and your environment. We actually sell a book in the Maps bookstore called the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide,
Mm-hmm.
that has a lot of kind of information about how to kind of manage those types of situations if that's something that somebody is going to engage in. My personal experience has been that it's good to know that somebody is keeping tabs on you, and that in some sense that can facilitate you opening up to whatever experience is going to happen.
Absolutely. So I want to get to the more clinical aspects of things in a second, but I have one more question around the whole idea of the fears and everything associated with psychedelics. Another one of my personal fears, and I know it's a very commonly held one, is you do see kind of the, just to stereotype here for a second, like older individual that's kind of that hippie burnout thing. And I know a lot of people have that fear. It's like, I don't want to become that guy. Do you have any advice for people that have that kind of belief?
Sure, and I think you this isn't just a thing that happens with psychedelics. This is a thing. Having spent some time in doing a lot of meditation and stuff, you see that in sort of more orthodox spiritual circles too. People who are sort of um, they've had these big experiences and then they haven't integrated them back into their life. You know, they've seen this other place and they don't want to come back. You know, um, and a lot of that is just having support for integrating whatever experience that you've had. You know, like in the studies that we do, we spend a lot of time, more time really, helping people integrate the experiences that they've had during their treatment sessions with a psychedelic. It's like, you know, for every, like they, you know, they'll have like 3 MDMA sessions spaced a month apart in our PTSD studies, and then in between they'll also have like 3 separate integration sessions in between each treatment session. So there's a lot of time that's being spent on like integrating these insights and continuing to process what's come up, and so I think it's very easy. It's very, like, this is one downside of psychedelics in some senses. It's very easy to have um, big experiences
Mm-hmm.
and to sort of get caught in that as like that over there was like the truth. That was what was really important, and now I'm back in my life, and this sucks. You know, I remember, if I can tell like a little story. I remember I was at an event, and I was talking to this guy who had he just had this really amazing experience. He just wanted to tell me about it. That he had smoked some DMT, and he experienced his entire body turning into light. And he was just like, this was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. It was as beautiful as like watching the birth of my daughter. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he was like, yeah, I'm gonna go find my friend and we're gonna do some LSD this afternoon. And I was like, wait, what?
Mm.
Like, you know, you just had this incredible thing, and there's this sort of desire to replicate it and to stay there, and that's not how it works. The value in these experiences is how they influence you moving about in your day-to-day life and in the world with people. Not in what kind of heavenly realm can I create for myself so that I don't have to deal with the ins and outs of everyday life.
Let me see if I understand it correctly, but to me, while you were talking, it kind of reminds me of, in a sense, like there's people that have a drink or two with friends and are social, and there's other people that they need to get wasted because they want that feeling constantly. And is that kind of a relevant way to explain it, or?
Yeah, that can happen. I think that can happen, and like I said, that can happen in like Orthodox spirituality too. Like people can get addicted to to spiritual highs. And it's behind that is always like, well, what are you running from? What are you not comfortable dealing with? That's always, I think, the worthwhile question to ask.
So let's talk about integration, because this seems to be one of the key components to this whole thing. And you said that you guys will have like 3 sessions in between one of the actual MDMA sessions. So what does an integration session look like, and how can listeners potentially benefit from the research you've done?
So I guess it would be good, I think, maybe to talk a little bit about how we structure the studies that we're doing as kind of a way of providing some context. The way we have our PTSD studies structured is people who are applying to be in them they have to go through this really extensive battery of psychological testing. We want to know that they have PTSD. We want to know that their PTSD is pretty bad. We want to know that they've tried other things and they haven't worked, all that kind of stuff. And then once they're in the study, they'll do some preparatory work with their therapists to sort of establish a relationship and to sort of make sure they feel comfortable in the space and to clarify expectations. All these things are important. And then they'll have these three to five actually treatment sessions, which are about 8 hours long. So it's very intensive. It's not like you just go into your therapist's office for an hour. It's a full day. We're actually pretty non-directive. Our like therapeutic method is very non-directive. So what that means is the therapists are not there to tell the patient or the participant in the study what to do. They're there to support whatever experience is unfolding already. We use this vocabulary of an inner healing intelligence, which is like, if you break your arm and you go to the hospital, right, the doctor doesn't really heal your arm, right? He can clean out the abrasions and he can set the bone and he can wrap it up in a cast, but your body knows how to heal that and the doctor doesn't. So we take the same approach to people's internal landscape, that the therapists can provide support and they can provide some direction and they can kind of help clean things out or offer different perspectives, but the healing is happening. The healing is an internal process. So, when people go to their integration sessions in between a treatment session, a lot of that is like, people will have the treatment session and stuff will still be coming up for weeks afterwards. Mm-hmm. It's not like they have the treatment session and it's like, oh, great, everything's better now. It's like sometimes when people have really severe trauma, that the treatment session will activate stuff. And so they'll be like, it'll bring up things that have been repressed or that have been frozen. And so in that intervening period, sometimes they'll be more distressed than they were at the beginning of the study. So the integration period is about sort of learning new ways to work with these emotions that were previously intolerable, right? That's in a sense what PTSD is about. There's an experience that is intolerable on some level for that person's nervous system, and so it just kind of gets stuck in there. MDMA provides this safe container for that material to start moving through their nervous system and getting processed. But the MDMA itself is just a support as well. So the participant is having to learn new ways of working with that material and working with those emotions, which can range from terror shame, rage, guilt. Like these are really, really intense things. And so integration is about uh, learning, in some sense, how to function and how to bring what they experienced in the MDMA sessions into how they work with themselves day to day, moment to moment.
Mm. So let me ask you then, if obviously most of the listeners probably do not have PTSD, if there is a listener that does experience or play around's not the right word, but use psychedelics occasionally, how can they use some of the research you're talking about to help them integrate their own personal experiences?
This is a tricky question.
Okay.
I think I don't want to be in the position of advocating a particular therapeutic approach to somebody.
Okay.
Um, I think what I will say is that whether or not somebody has PTSD, everybody has trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is like culturally, this is a really underreported thing. And so whether people are using psychedelics or not, I think being willing to take a look at yourself and being willing to investigate your experience and investigate places that are blocked for you or places that are scary for you, or like feelings that you don't want to deal with. This is the important thing, and how you do that is much less important than the willingness to look and the willingness to be curious and the willingness to treat yourself kindly.
So let's focus on that for a second then. How do you recommend people, and getting away from the psychedelics, but how can people kind of do that? How can they look at themselves openly? I mean, is it just meditation, or are there other approaches?
Therapy works for some people. Meditation works for some people. Like mindfulness is a big thing, is kind of getting a lot of traction in the culture right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really only one approach to these things. I got a lot for a while out of this process called the work, which is this woman Byron Katie. It's just a method of like sort of putting thoughts and beliefs down on paper, and it's like, well, is that true? Like sort of just investigating the habitual things that you tell yourself.
Mm.
And I think everybody, I think everybody on some level has a sense of like, even if they haven't really had a lot of experience, they have a sense of like how to look at themselves and how to question and how to be like, well, what's really important to me, and like what do I feel like is blocking me? I think there's so many things out there that are purporting to be like the way you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like this guy meditates, and this guy does psychedelics, and this guy goes to church, and this, but I think sort of just trusting your own curiosity
Okay.
is like, man, I think that's really a wonderful thing, to be really willing to trust your own inquisitiveness and your, I mean, everybody's so curious when they're a child, and we sort of get it like beaten out of us. But it's still there, and it still wants to learn about the world, and it still wants you to learn about yourself.
So it sounds like one way to just kind of tip your toes into it, or dip your toes into it, and get started is asking yourself those real questions, and trying to maybe even write it down on paper and see, is this really what I think?
Yeah, I think that can be really useful, and I also think like one really important thing that I've been learning is the necessity of asking really without like knowing what you want the answer to be, or you know what I mean? Like we like sometimes people will like, for example, right now I've been sort of going through this process where I'm trying to make something that feels like a big decision, and I've been sort of just running over it and over it and over it, and at a certain point I realized like I'm trying to stack the deck here, like I'm like trying to figure this thing out, but I already have some idea of what I should do, right? And that's preventing me from actually having like a real it's preventing me from actually finding out what I want.
Absolutely.
Because I already have this idea of what's the right thing, and you know what I mean. So just dropping all of that and just being like, what what's going on here? What feels good to me? Where am I?
Absolutely.
I think,
So let's get back to the research you guys are doing at MAPS.
oops.
What other than so you're doing the MDMA to help prevent or treat to some degree PTSD? Is there any other experiments or things that you guys are doing research on?
Yeah. So we're doing two other MDMA studies right now. One is for anxiety associated with a life-threatening illness. So this is people who've had cancer or something similar. They may have cancer now. They may have had it in the past, but it might come back, and who are experiencing a lot of anxiety about that. Um, and then one is for social anxiety in adults who are on the autism spectrum. Um, we decided to do that one. That one's pretty interesting. We were just getting these anecdotal reports for years and years and years from people who have Asperger's or people who are on the autism spectrum, and they'll write us a letter and they'll say, hey, I took MDMA at this music festival, and all of it, I could never understand other people before. I could never understand why they were doing the things that they were doing. I could never understand what they were feeling, and all of a sudden I got it. So we wanted to look at that, and with that study, we're not looking to treat autism. That's sort of not our purview, but we are interested in seeing if this can make life easier for people who are on the autism spectrum. So I think that's really interesting. And then I have all this data open on my desktop right now. We're wrapping up these two observational studies that we've been doing in Mexico and New Zealand on this substance called ibogaine, which is not all that well known relative to a lot of these other substances. But it's a psychedelic that comes from West Africa, and it has some really, really interesting properties when it's used to treat people who are addicted to opiates. It seems to really help people get through withdrawals. For some people, it totally eliminates the craving to use. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening with that too. So those are our main projects right now.
What do you feel?
Oh, also, sorry. We're also I'll be taken to task if I don't mention this. We're also working on a really big study in veterans with PTSD, but we're looking at marijuana in these individuals, which is a little bit more of a symptom management strategy than the MDMA work, which is sort of more oriented towards healing. But people for whom that's not available, marijuana may be a good way of managing their symptoms. So we're also taking a look at that. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No problem. What about LSD or I don't know the clinical term mushrooms? I've read a lot of interesting research on both. Do you guys do any research on that?
We did a study. We completed a study a few years ago in Switzerland on LSD, also for anxiety associated with life-threatening illness. There's a lot more stigma still in this country around LSD, and it's something that we haven't really wanted to touch, in large part because we feel like MDMA is sort of the most promising of these drugs, or has the most chance of getting through the prescription drug approval process. And then psilocybin, there's another organization called, I think it's Hefter, I'm not sure if it's the Hefter Research Institute, and they do a lot of work with psilocybin, and they've sort of planted their flag there, and so we're happy for them to be doing the research with that. And we kind of have a little bit of a friendly rivalry to see who can get their drug of choice approved first. But they are doing a lot of really interesting research with psilocybin.
That's awesome. So another one I've heard a lot about, I'm curious to hear your opinion, is ayahuasca being having some medicinal and helping benefits. How do you feel about ayahuasca?
It's not something that we are actively researching. It's also kind of tricky to do research with because it's this it's a plant concoction. You know what I mean? It's not just a single plant. It's all of these different jungle plants in varying proportions, and there's all these different tribes in different parts of the Amazon and in different parts of South America have their own ways of making it, and it's hard to standardize in a way that makes it easy to do research. We are going to be doing some observational work with it. just personally, it's not something that I've tried. I think it's really interesting, and I think I know a lot of people who've said they've gotten tremendous benefits from it. I think there's some concern from a sort of an anthropological perspective about ayahuasca tourism.
Oh yeah.
About people sort of jet setting down to Peru for a weekend and doing ayahuasca and then coming back and not having a lot of integration support and sort of having a negative impact on the cultures for whom that's been their practice for thousands of years. So I think there's some issues that need to be worked out with that. But I definitely know some people for whom they feel that it has tremendous value.
Yeah, I actually was down in Iquitos just to go see the Amazon jungle, and Iquitos is very popular for the ayahuasca people. All my stuff ended up being stolen. I ended up staying with an ayahuasca. He wouldn't call himself a shaman, but he owns like a place.
Clinic.
Yeah, like a clinic type thing, and he's done it over 500 times. And talking with him was just a different conversation than I've ever had with anybody.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's I think one thing that's really interesting about ayahuasca is people tend to have these experiences that really crack open the sort of Western scientific materialist paradigm of reality. I mean, those experiences, people also have those with LSD and things like that. But I mean, people communicate with plants, with spirit entities. It's just a totally different way of interacting and interfacing with reality. I think that's really interesting.
And what he kind of told me, and I think it's true with all the research you guys are doing as well, is, if you have a broken arm, go to the doctor. If you have something like that, go to a doctor. But most of the diseases that are affecting the modern world are diseases of the mind. Everything from addiction to obesity and all that kind of stuff. And that really hit me because it's interesting because personality or your mindset really does play a role in a lot of the diseases that are going on. But I want to kind of wrap things up here, and I have one more. It's a big question for you, and it is: what advice would you give to people in their 20s? And it doesn't have to be psychedelic related at all. Anything from your experience that you're like, man, I wish I knew this earlier.
Be kind to yourself. I spent so much time being so hard on myself, and still am sometimes. But that was just like a theme from my teenage years through college, and it's just like I sort of look back at that and I just feel sad. It's like there's nothing that's more important than that. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter how visible your success is. It doesn't matter what relationships you have with other people in your life. If your relation to yourself is rooted in conflict or unkindness, you're always going to be suffering. And I think that's something that I've learned from psychedelics and from a lot of other places. But I think it really all comes down to kindness.
I like that. That's a really good one. Where can people find out more about you or MAPS? And is there anything you want the listeners to take away from this on like how they can help further the cause?
Yeah, people can go to maps.org and they can learn all about all the research that we're doing, all of the events that we're doing. We do a lot of events, not just out here on the West Coast, but in New York. I think we have an event coming up in Austin, Texas in the next couple months. And so we do things periodically. People can get on our mailing list. We always love it if people want to donate. We're a nonprofit. We are totally funded by private donations. There's not a lot of government money coming in yet for psychedelic research. So we're always happy for people to show their support financially, but we also just love people to get involved and to express their enthusiasm. And we love when people volunteer their time and all. People should check out the website, see what tickles their fancy, and see what would feel good as far as a way for them to get involved and help out.
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes. And Ben, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Travis.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter. And I release a new video every Monday. And by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.